It began with quiet deaths, healthy people suddenly collapsing, a neighbor, a relative, a friend. One by one, they died, and one woman was always nearby. She didn't carry a weapon, she used poison. Swift, silent, and deadly, they called her the Cyanide Witch. This is the story of Le Tang Van, Vietnam's most notorious female serial killer. A woman who killed without mercy and almost got away with it. It started on January 3, 1998. An elderly woman named Van Le suddenly collapsed in her home. She was rushed to the hospital but never made it out alive. A few months later, Quoc Minh, a security guard, was brought to the Tân Bình Medical Center after a sudden unexplained illness. He died there, then another victim, Hin Van Giang. Same pattern, seemingly fine until she wasn't, and then dead. On February 24, 1999, Lim became the next fall ill. This time while receiving treatment at Gia Định People's Hospital, he didn't survive. Then came a woman named Hoi Mon Dao. She got sick during lunch, poisoned, doctor said, but she survived. After receiving treatment, she was released from the hospital that very night into the care of an acquaintance. That same night, she was poisoned again. That time, there was no saving her. To the outside world, it all looked random, isolated tragedies. But to police, the pattern was unmistakable. Each of the victims had one person in common. Le Than Van, she wasn't just connected to the victims. In some cases, she had inherited their wealth. The more investigators looked into her, the more alarmed they became. But confronting her wasn't easy. Van didn't cooperate. She avoided police, refused to testify, so to stop her before anyone else could die, authorities took an unusual step. They arrested her on charges of illegal substance possession. On October 15th, they caught her in the village of Duc Leo, but even behind bars, questions remained. Who exactly was Le Tang Van? Why did she kill? Le Than Van was born on December 5, 1956 in Saigon, back when it was still South Vietnam. She was the second child in a family of 9, but after her older brother died young, she became the eldest. Her father worked in drainage, her mother was a midwife. Life was hard, and growing up in a household packed with siblings in a country going through war and hardship, Van developed a cold, hardened personality. People who knew her back then described her as difficult, unruly, quick to argue, prone to violence, sometimes even taking it out on family pets just because she felt like it. She did attend school, but it didn't last. Halfway through her senior year, she dropped out. Then came 1975, the end of the Vietnam War. Van enrolled at the Military Medical School of Dentistry. But whatever dream she may have had didn't last long. Not long after, she was arrested for trying to cross the border illegally and spent 16 months in a re-education camp. When she got out, she jumped from job to job trying to scrape by. But no matter where she went, trouble followed. In 1979, she was arrested again, this time for impersonating an army captain. She served a few more months behind bars. Then in 1989, she married a man named Unwan Quang My and had 2 children. But 5 years later, he died because undisclosed. 2 years after that, she remarried. Her new husband Lin Ming died the very next year, this time in the hospital. By 1990, she was behind bars again. Arrested in District 5 for forgery and theft. She served 18 months. After that, she needed work, something steady. She eventually found a job as a caretaker for the Jung family, but something inside her had changed. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was greed. To this day, no one knows what exactly the trigger was. Whatever the reason, Van made a plan. On October 24, 1992, she cooked chicken noodles for the family. But the meal wasn't just dinner. She had laced the food with cyanide, intending to kill every last member of the household. After just a few bites, the entire family fell violently ill. They were rushed to the hospital, but it was too late for Mrs. Bui, the mother. She died from the poisoning. And according to witnesses, Lin Ming simply watched it all unfold quietly with a smile. Of course, the surviving members of the Jun family suspected her immediately. She had made the food, no one else had access, no one else had motive. They pushed for an autopsy and the results confirmed it. Mrs. Bui had died from cyanide poisoning. But in a frustrating twist, there wasn't enough evidence to charge Fun with murder. No one actually saw her add poison. And there was no physical evidence, no cyanide residue, no purchase records, no witness to act. Without a smoking gun, prosecutors couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that Van intentionally killed. So instead, they pursued what they could prove. She had taken money under false pretenses. She had stolen from the family, and she had manipulated her position in the household. So instead, she was tried and convicted on lesser charges, fraud, and served just 4 years in prison. 1 year after her release, toward the end of 1997, she found work again, this time at the Military Hospital 7A in Ho Chi Minh City, and that's where she met Dingbin Khan. At first, it was just a smile exchanged in the hallway, then small talk, which led to conversations. Van introduced herself as a dentistry specialist, one who had studied in Germany and could speak 7 languages. It was all a lie, of course, but it sounded impressive and it worked. Kay was so taken by her story that he offered her a job at his family's dental clinic in Lokang. What he didn't realize was he just let a killer into his life. "This is my chance to make more money," that's what Let Tang Bunin told herself. So without hesitation, she packed up and moved to Lokang, taking the job offered by Dingbin Khan. At first, she made a good impression. She played the role well, professional, polite, and charming. She quickly became one of the most trusted people at the clinic. So much so, she ended up marrying one of the employees there, Zhou Xiangquang. But as time went on, things started falling apart. The once popular clinic began to lose business. Patients stopped coming and money dried up. Even her husband, Kwang, was at risk of being fired. Van found out when she overheard a private conversation between Cam's elderly mother, Vatili, and her son. Lee had suggested they let Kwang go quietly before things got worse. To most people, this would be devastating news, but to Van, it was a trigger. She couldn't risk losing the job. That meant losing the money, the stability. So she came up with a solution: eliminate the problem. On January 3, 1998, with come away from the clinic, Van made her move. She laced a glass of lemonade with cyanide and gave it to Vatili. The elderly woman collapsed just 30 minutes later. Van and her husband rushed her to the hospital, but it was already too late. The poison had done its job. Lee died soon after. On the way home from the hospital, Van stole 900,000 dong from the old woman's personal savings, her last cruel act to cap off the murder. But it didn't stop there. By June 2nd, the money from the first crime was already running low. So she started looking for her next target. She found one, Wakaming, a security guard at the Tianfu Company in Tuning District. She posed once again as a respected dentist and convinced Ming to lease her small dental space for 500,000 dong per month. Then came the grooming. She started hanging out with Ming, buying him drinks, chatting with him like an old friend. She was kind, soft-spoken, and seemingly harmless. And when she had gained enough of his trust, she poisoned his drink with cyanide. Ming collapsed and was rushed to the Tunbing Medical Center. But just like before, the doctors couldn't save him. While Ming lay dying, Van was at his house rummaging through his belongings. She walked away with another 900,000 dong. Just a month later, she turned her attention to her own mother-in-law, Hin Vanzing. Same pattern. This time, it was tea laced with cyanide. After Zing died, Van claimed her inheritance, roughly $2.8 million dong. But even with all that money, she wanted more. Then came February 24, 1999. Her next victim was her brother-in-law, Leon Kum. He had recently broken his finger and asked Van, still pretending to be a dental and medical specialist, to help administer his medication. While his back was turned, she mixed cyanide into the ointment. By the end of the day, Kim was dead, pronounced at Zedong People's Hospital, but she still wasn't done. Next on our list was a woman named Hoi Mong Dao. Vân offered to give her a health checkup at her clinic. On the way, they stopped at a roadside noodle shop for lunch. While Dao wasn't looking, Avon poisoned her a bowl of noodles. Not long after, Dao collapsed. She was rushed to the hospital where thankfully she received treatment in time and survived. But that same night, Dao was released into the care of someone else she trusted. And somehow, Vân got to her again. She poisoned Dao a second time. This time, it worked. Dao died before sunrise. By now, the deaths were piling up. The pattern was forming. She was unstoppable and she was getting bolder and bolder. The next killing happened just months after the death of Hoi Mong Dao. Vân had met a man named Vu Kim, the director of New Quan. The two grew close, spending time together like old friends. To Kim, Vân was warm, charming, and trustworthy. To Vân, he was the next target. On the morning of September 4th, 1999, she invited him on a trip to a temple. She said she wanted to ask a monk for a lucky day to renovate her mother's house, and Kim, without the slightest suspicion, agreed. He drove her to a Tibetan-style pagod in Tuat, a quiet town in Binyang province. On the way, they stopped for lunch, and when Kim excused himself to go to the bathroom, Vân sprinkled cyanide into his drink. By the time he finished it, the poison had already begun to take effect. He felt dizzy and sick. But instead of taking him to the hospital, Vân dragged him along, still pretending to go to the temple. As they walked the quiet path leading up to the pagoda, Kim's body began to fail him. He staggered, then collapsed beneath a tree. Vân didn't panic, she simply left him there. She walked up to the temple alone, calm and collected. Old the monk, her friend, wasn't feeling well and had turned back. Minutes later, a panicked monk ran up. He just discovered a man lying lifeless under a tree. And Vân, she put on her mask again, rushed back, acted horrified, cried beside the body. By the time police arrived, Vân had vanished. So had Kim's expensive motorbike. She was relentless. If there was money to take, she took it, even if it meant leaving a dead body behind. By 2000, she had changed her name to Leland and started over again. She found work with a man named Muin Tanganern in Annan, a locality within Pingyang province. Once again, she cooked and once again, she poisoned the meal, rice vermicelli this time, and died. Later that same month, she killed two more acquaintances, Gwyn Van Dong and Chanty Singh. After Singh's death, to explain the money transfer, Vân mailed a handwritten letter to the family, claiming Singh just bought a car from her for 200 million dong. She was building a paper trail, a lie. But her name had come up too many times now, to many coincidences. The police were watching. Not long after, they arrested her on suspicion of murder and robbery. When they searched her handbag, they found a vial of 2.8 g of cyanide, enough to kill 20 healthy adults, but still they couldn't hold her for murder. Toxicology tests didn't match the poison found in the last two victims. And without that link, the case fell apart. Once again, she slipped through. She was released on bail on January 15, 2001 on nothing more than fraud charges. Then came March 2001, she crossed paths with an old friend W. Jungzu. He offered to give her lift to a cafe on his motorbike. Just two old friends catching up, they stopped to chat over a bottle of soy milk. And while Zhu was distracted fixing something on his motorbike, Vân poisoned his drink. 15 minutes later, Zhu collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital where he died 5 hours later. Doctors ruled it a stroke. In reality, it was anything but. Vân took his mobile phone, stole 74,000 dong, and even tried to inflate the funeral cost, claiming Zhu's son owned her for helping arrange everything. But the lie didn't hold. She pawned his motorbike for 2.8 million dong and disappeared again, this time to Trangbom district. There, she targeted a woman named Dae Ki Ka, But when her fake dental certificate didn't convince the woman, Van turned to what she knew best: poison. And still no one had stopped her. The police lost her again and again while the body count kept rising. Between June and August 2001, Lê Thanh Vân struck again. Her next victim was a man named Con Van Coy, killed for nothing more than his motorbike. And shortly after, she poisoned a woman named Tang using the very motorbike she stole from Coy. Van rode Tang to the hospital where Tang later died. And just like before, Van took over her victim's life. She started using the alias Lam Andao, took over Tang's clothing store, and even sold off land in the Budang district for 40 million dong. While her killing spree continued, the authorities never stopped watching. Investigators still suspected her. They sent her multiple interview invitations, each one ignored. With no cooperation and lives still at risk, police finally acted. They charged her not with murder, but with illegal possession of poison that they found earlier in her bag. On October 15, 2001, the arrest warrant was approved. Van was found and taken into custody in the village of Duke Leo, and now with her in custody, the trial began on August 25, 2001. It became an instant media frenzy. This wasn't just any criminal case. Was she going to become Vietnam's first ever woman serial killer? A woman accused of murdering 13 people. International outlets called her Vietnam Cyanide Witch. Inside the courtroom, Bun claimed she was innocent. She said she had simply been helping victims, transporting them to the hospital. She even said police forced her to testify, then she blamed her husband, but that backfired. Quang, frustrated and cornered, confessed everything he knew. Just days later, Van fainted in court, causing a delay in the trial. A doctor later said it was due to an undetermined psychological issue. By July 2002, investigators from 3 provinces merged their unsolved cases. The one connection across all of them, Lê Thanh Vân, but to solidify the case, they had to clarify Quang's role. He was arrested on August 14th, charged with failing to report capital crimes. Also, Quang was convicted of 1 murder, murdering Coy, and robbery that he directly participated in based on his own confession. On January 3, 2003, a preliminary review was held. At that time, the body of Coy, one of her most recent victims, still hadn't been found. Witnesses were scarce and Van still pretending to be ill, still refusing to talk, so investigators narrowed their focus. They questioned her about just 1 case, the murder of Tang, her last victim, and then a breakthrough. After being transferred to a new detention facility, Van finally confessed, not just to that murder, but hinted at more. Still, many of her killings remained unverified. Some victims had survived, but without hard evidence, those charges were never pursued. When asked where she got the cyanide, Van lied again, claiming police had asked her to buy it from a chemical shop in District 10. She said she was just trying to help the police. With her confession and Quang's statements, prosecutors now had enough to move forward. On September 1, 2004, they sought the death penalty for Van for murder, robbery, and illegal possession of poison. They also requested a sentence of 21 to 24 years for Quang for only 1 count of murder and robbery. Both were found guilty. Van received the death sentence. Quang was sentenced to 21 years in prison. They both appealed. Van said the sentence was unfair. Quang asked for leniency. At the appellate hearing on February 1, 2005, Van admitted to illegal possession and to murders, but continued to deny the rest despite the confessions and witness testimony. In the end, the Supreme People's Court upheld her death sentence, but Quang's sentence was reduced from 21 years to 17. Van later filed for a pardon, sent directly to President Chondakong. It was swiftly denied, and when news of her imprisonment broke, the public was stunned. The cyanide which had finally been stopped. But the thing is, no one knows how many people she killed. Officially, Lê Thanh Vân was convicted of 13 murders. These were cases where the evidence was solid, supported by witness testimony, consistent patterns, and in some instances, her own confession. But beyond those 13 confirmed deaths, there's more. Investigators strongly suspect our involvement in at least 8 additional cases involving 16 people, 3 of whom died and 13 who barely survived thanks to timely emergency care. So why wasn't she charged for those? Simple. Lack of hard evidence, no eyewitnesses, no physical proof, no confession, just disturbing patterns, overlapping timelines, and one common thread. Letangin was always nearby when someone got poisoned. And then there is her first husband. Was he her first victim? A young healthy man who suddenly collapsed and died within an hour at the hospital. At the time, he was deputy director of Ben Hua glass factory. He had power, money, and status. He had no known illness. No, cause that made sense. To this day, his death remains officially unexplained, but many believe he may have been her very first victim. After her first husband died so suddenly, she sold the house, packed up, and moved to Ho Chi Minh City. This time with a new lover, who also died soon after. So, while 13 murders were confirmed in court, the true number of lives lost or nearly lost to Vin's poison, we may never know. On October 26, 2005, Lei Tangvin was executed by firing squad at the TU's Mut Cemetery. Nguyen Zong, a member of the local execution council, later described the scene. At 4 a.m., officers moved silently through the prison halls. The clinking of keys echoed through the concrete walls, marking the final minutes of the prisoner's life. Van was escorted from her cell, but instead of reflecting on her past, she cursed at the guards, fought back, and then burst into tears when told her request for a presidential pardon has been denied. Maybe in that moment, the weight of death finally caught up with her. The officers prepared her final meal, her favorite dishes, but she couldn't eat. She refused to cooperate, and her defiance remained until the very end. Just before the bullets were loaded into the rifles, Van made one last request. She asked the soldiers to remove her blindfold. She said she wanted to see the world one last time, to look at her loved ones, the sky, the outside world, and then just like that, it was over. The cyanide witch of Vietnam was gone, but one question still lingers. Why? What made Letang Ban become one of Southeast Asia's deadliest women? Was it all about money? Was it childhood trauma? Was it years of rejection, instability, and prison time that hardened her into a killer? Some experts think so. Lang Tien, a journalist from Chui, believes it was a mix of factors. A harsh upbringing, lack of stability, and a warped survival instinct turned lethal. But what do you think? Was she a woman shaped by circumstance or a cold, calculated killer who simply enjoyed the power? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes the real weight of these stories lies in not only how they end, but how they began. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.